Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you've enjoyed this morning with all its diversity. And now we will spend an hour and a half, about an hour and a half with Andrea Wulf. So sorry for the technical problem that has just happened. Luckily, it's been solved and we can move on. So ever since I was a teenager, I actually really enjoyed reading the biography of scientists. I don't know why, because I wasn't particularly a geek, but I always thought it was really interesting to see what the life of a scientist is. So how did Johannes Kepler live in the 16th century, or the mathematician Évariste Galois that died when he was 21 but already managed to solve a problem in math that for 350 years nobody managed to solve. Of course, also Marie Curie is a big classic, or Darwin, or lately a wonderful biography of Newton. And so one day my husband brings back this book for me, and it's called The Invention of Nature. It was funny because this book has 3 titles, and the third one is really the one I prefer. So The Invention of Nature, The Adventures of Alexander von Humboldt, and the last one is The Lost Hero of Science. So I had actually heard of von Humboldt, but not very much. The only thing I knew is that I was offered a von Humboldt Fellowship to do a postdoc at the European Molecular Biology in Heidelberg. But that's all I knew about this person. And so I started Andrea Wulf's book, and I can only envy the people that haven't read it yet. It's an amazing book about the life of this amazing person, a man, even though we're the Women's Day. And the way that Andrea Wulf has described the life of this person is wonderful, and I won't spoil you. So Andrea Wulf is of German origin. She was born in New Delhi and spent a few years of her early childhood in India. And then her family moved to Hamburg, where she grew up. And then she decided to study in London. She studied history at the Royal let me get this right, the Royal College of Art in London. And so she has written a number of books, which I still hope to discover. One of them is, for example, the Brother Gardeners, about the gentleman naturalists that became completely fanatic at some point in the 18th century, 17th, 18th century, finding all these plants all over the world and bringing them back to England. And this appears to be where the love of the British people for gardens comes from. So this session will start with a pre-recorded talk by Andrea, and then we will have Andrea live for a discussion, and then everybody is again welcome to ask any question you might have. So thank you very much, Andrea, for accepting the invitation, and we're looking forward to hearing your talk. This was a really wonderful talk, and Andrea Wulf will join us now live from London. So I haven't told you, but she received, not surprisingly, 2 very important prizes for this book in 2016. I have to read it because these English titles are very complicated. One was from the Royal Society Insight Investment Science Book Prize, and the other from the Royal Geographical Society's Nest Award, which are 2 of the most prestigious science book awards in English language. So I hope that Andrea can join us.
Hear you. I don't know.
Oh, great, wonderful. Thank you for being here, and sorry for the delay that was linked
Not at all.
Listening to you was wonderful. I mean, the enthusiasm that's in your book and the curiosity of von Humboldt is just amazing, and the timeliness of this book with what we're going through on this planet is remarkable. Maybe you can tell us how you choose books, what you're going to write about.
Well, I wanted to actually start with just very briefly talking about the elephant in the room, which is that it's International Woman Day, and I'm talking about a man. So I woke up this morning with this feeling like, ooh, this feels just wrong. I need to explain this a little bit. So I remembered something that when I published this book, I won the Royal Society Science Book Prize in 2016, which is the biggest science book prize in the UK. So I was rather proud of this. And then the next day or the day after, The Guardian, of all newspapers, because I like The Guardian, published an article written by a man, of course, about how the Royal Society had been pressured to give their awards to more women because they had a really bad, I think they had in 60 years, they had 3 women on the shortlist. But then the article argued that the reason they had been pressured and the reason why they went for a biography for a science book prize was because it was written by a woman, arguing that women tend to write about people while their male counterparts write about real scientific problems and scientific endeavor. So I think there's still enough to do to allow me to talk about a man rather than a woman, because I think Humboldt has done a lot of things like his work, which we can look at for climate change, which are so important today for all genders, really.
So we're very thankful that you did write this book, and what I don't remember from the book, but that you presented, is that it gives us a feeling with the images you showed about how his trend of thoughts went, and this thinking in an arborescent way, and all these notes that you showed.
Yeah.
Probably this is what we need now again.
I think this kind of, this interdisciplinary approach is incredibly important. But let me come back to your actual first question, which is like, how do I come to write these books, or how do I choose my subjects, probably. So for me, although it doesn't look from the outside, this is all a very logical row of books. I'm basically interested in the relationship between humankind and nature. I've always been a very outdoorsy person. I've always been incredibly concerned about the environment. So that's been my main interest. And as a historian, I have always believed, or maybe that's the reason why I became a historian, is I believe that we can make sense of the world today by looking to our past. Maybe it's an excuse because I don't actually have to deal with changing the present. I can be the storyteller to show you what has happened, and this is how we are who we are. But that is what I do, and all my books are really within that line of thinking. I'm interested in storytelling in the sense that so I'm originally from Germany, and I've lived in London and in England for more than 25 years now. But I've always had the feeling there's a huge difference between non-fiction writing in Germany and in England. This is one of the reasons why I started when I moved to England, and why I write in English, not in German, because the German non-fiction book is much more dry. Let's say dry. While the English tradition of history, I mean, it has the word story in it, is much more about storytelling. And I don't think that's a soft approach. I just think it's an approach that someone like Humboldt also chose, where you, in order to convey what you want to say, you try to do it in a way that people actually enjoy reading it. Just because you enjoy reading it does not mean that it hasn't been based on fact. So everything that is in this book, when Humboldt walks along the Seine in Paris and he sees the washerwomen kind of like cleaning their clothes, then this is from a manuscript, from a letter, from a diary entry. So nothing is invented, but I think I'm interested in these stories that connect to us also in our daily lives in a way.
So you mentioned that you followed Humboldt for 10 years. So what were the major struggles or difficulties in
the joys?
Well, joys must have been many, but
well, I think the worst bit about writing about Humboldt is really his handwriting. It's terrible. So I really struggled in the beginning, and then also when you realize that he writes in different languages, so sometimes you fight through a page, and it's only after a few lines that you realize, oh, he's actually writing in Spanish. That's why I can't understand it or can't read it. So that's been the difficult bit. The joyous bit has always been the traveling, of course. It's been an incredible journey for me. And I don't think I will ever write a book that will give me so much joy in terms of actual physical traveling. But it's also been amazing to meet a lot of people who work on Humboldt, who have this Humboldtian belief of sharing their knowledge. I would have never been able to write this book without the help of all these Humboldt scholars who've worked on his stuff for, decades sometimes, because he's written so much that there's absolutely no way that one person can kind of tackle all this. So that's been incredibly pleasurable. And a lot of them I'm still in contact with, and we still share information. And there's always something about when you work on Humboldt. I just got yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I got an email from a Harvard academic who's doing an archaeological project in Peru, asking me if I know where in his diary there is stuff. And you just stop everything and you send this stuff over, because there's just something exciting about so many different disciplines working on him.
So clearly he had an absolutely endless curiosity, and you mentioned that people couldn't follow him. Going through his notes, could you actually follow his trend of thought, or was this...
Difficult? No, not really. So you have to. So I want to describe to you how these notes are kept, or were kept by Humboldt. So don't think this is like a nicely archived set of pages. And the archives in Berlin, they've actually kept it how he kept it, which is wonderful. So he had these boxes. He called them so Kasten in German. So he had boxes, and in these boxes he put envelopes, and in the envelopes he put information like his handwritten notes, but also newspaper articles, pages from books, a dried plant, and he labeled the envelopes, say lichen in Lapland, and he would put everything he knows about it, of letters someone wrote to him, he would put in this. And then that would be in the box, say, botany. But then when he started writing other books, this particular information about lichen was actually more interesting for geography, because he was looking at where does the lichen grow on a mountain. So then he could just take this envelope and put it in another box. So it's a very clever sorting system, I think. It's like a database, just an analog one. Because of that, sometimes it makes sense what you find, but sometimes not at all, because he was working on something new. He hadn't really labeled it properly, and you just have no idea why he put it in there. And then the worst bits are really the ones I showed, where he just, his lecture notes, where he just puts bits of paper on top of each other. And there's absolutely no way I can understand what he was thinking there. But again, I think it shows that he does not think in a linear way. He's always open to other aspects of thinking. For example, in Mexico, he's investigating yellow fever, but he also writes down data about the wind and temperature, and so it's not just looking at the patients. He's actually looking at the environment they're living in, and that is something very, very new in his approach.
So you mentioned earlier the elephant in the room, although nobody would be surprised that you're here today, since the vice presidency that has started at EPFL of transformation also deals with environment. So there is a link. But what struck me in the book, and you mentioned as well, is actually a form of inclusiveness that is discussed all around the world. Is that he wasn't considering people in South America as savages, and that he saw their strength, and that this empowerment in a way was so strong that it even, from what you write in the book, has triggered the revolution in South America. Maybe you want to say a bit more about that?
I wouldn't say it triggered it. I think it is something that was very important for Simón Bolívar, because Simón Bolívar, the liberator of the Spanish colonies, actually met Humboldt in Paris in 1804, before he started his revolution. And And this was really the first time he met a European who was in awe of South America. It was until then, scientists, especially French scientists, talked about South America as this, or the New World as this degenerated world where everything was smaller and uglier and weaker than in the old world. And Humboldt comes back with a very, very different portrait of South America. And he writes about South America in just such glowing colors, celebrating this magnificent continent, that was something that was very, very important for Bolivar and his fellow revolutionaries. And they took Humboldt's writing almost as in its kind of publicity for South America. So I think that's one thing. But the other thing that I think is very important is that Humboldt traveled through South America, of course, as a white European, but he looked at South America through a very open lens. He did not look at the indigenous people as barbarians or savages. Quite the opposite. They were his guides, and he often realized that their knowledge was so much more important than all the knowledge he had. So he has in his diaries, there's a lot of information about, for example, their worship of nature, because Humboldt is someone who in his entire life has never written about God. He talks about this force in nature, and I think it has a lot to do with what he encountered with the indigenous people in South America. Also, that this idea that nature is a living organism is, of course, something that's in the indigenous culture, something that's that is the kind of basis of their beliefs. So he's traveling with an open mind. That doesn't mean that he's never the Victorian kind of explorer. There are moments when he gets impatient with them because they can't translate to him what it means. There's one moment, and I think that's really the only moment, where he basically takes some skeletons from a grave, and they are upset, and he basically says, "Why don't they understand? This is for the greater good of science." But that's the only moment in his entire oeuvre where I saw him kind of be this very arrogant European. Other than that, I think he travels with a very different mind through South America than any of the other explorers. He's also, and we shouldn't forget that, he's traveling as a private person. So he's not financed by a king or by a monarch. So he can be nimble. He can decide where he wants to go. He can basically do whatever he wants to do because he pays for it himself. I can't hear you.
Me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It's because they're switching me off. I think this is relevant also to girls and women, because it shows that when somebody admires you, it gives you self-confidence that then gives you the strength to act. And in your book, you mentioned that that probably many people saw at that time the influence he had on Bolivar and others, to the extent that he was never allowed to travel to India.
Yes, this is so. Because Humboldt wanted to see the whole world. He wanted to compare everything. So one very important aspect of this was to compare the Andes with the Himalaya. That was something he wanted for many, many decades. And he went several times to London trying to convince the British to let him into the subcontinent. And he was refused again and again and again. And which is, when you look at the British side of things, kind of understandable, because there was this very troublesome Prussian explorer who had the permission from the Spanish king to travel to South America. And he comes back and he writes all these books in which he very publicly criticizes the Spanish colonial rule. So why on earth would they let him to India? And he kind of got around it a little bit, because he then became really the mentor, the supporter of a lot of explorers who went to India, and he treated them a little bit like his private army of helpers. So there's the British botanist Hooker, for example. He went to India, and Humboldt bombards him with these letters saying, go up, can you just go up this side of the mountain and measure where this plant is growing, where this plant is growing. So he gets his information from India in the end. But he says at the end of his life, he said that he's always regretted not being able to go to India.
But even you mentioned his trip through Russia. He wasn't really free to travel. He kind of took that freedom, no?
Yeah, well, once he was in Siberia, he just decided to do a little bit of a detour of like 2,000 miles or something like that. And obviously, no one from Moscow or St. Petersburg could stop him because he was far too far away. So he took his liberties when he was allowed to. Or when he could. He was very diplomatic, though. He was not someone he was a supporter of the revolutions in South America, but he had a problem with bloody revolutions. So he preferred, I think, slower reforms to bloody upheavals.
So part of our session together is to answer some of the questions that people that listen to have. But just before I go to the first question, I was just wondering if you're working on a new book.
I am actually working on a new book. I kind of got completely stuck in the pandemic because I had this kind of big book to a plan, which has been very good for my writing. Yeah, I'm writing. I've not worked out my elevator pitch in like one sentence, but it's about 10 years in Jena, which is where Humboldt met Goethe, where in those 10 years all of Germany's important philosophers, poets, and scientists lived in this tiny place for 10 years, and they come up with this new philosophy where they put the self at center stage. So I'm looking at that time in this tiny little town and arguing that we are today a selfish society as we are through those 10 years in Jena.
Okay, I'm looking forward. So the first question is, do you think there is a way to teach a holistic approach of science and emotions at modern tech universities?
Wow. Well, this is why I'm a historian, not working in a university. Well, I think for me, it would, but I don't know the practicalities of daily life. But I think the most important thing for me is that you bring different disciplines together and not just physics and chemistry, but you bring actually artists in, you bring musicians in, excuse me, you don't split it up. I have a huge problem with it, with these boxes, which actually exist even when we are children. Their whole education system is tailored towards that. I was told when I was 6 and in school, I was told I'm like the arty one and I'm really not good at the sciences. And I'm pretty sure my science teachers would turn in their graves thinking that I dare to write about science, because I think I was just taught wrongly. I fell into the sciences through the history of through the lives of these people, and then I get my head around how it works. So I think it's the problem is actually not the universities. I think the problems are the schools, that we have to start much earlier, encouraging children who are not like me, for example. I was never a numbers person, but I think I have a very scientific, logical mind. I was just scared when I saw numbers. So I think it starts in school. And then, I mean, saying that in a university that's very much tailored towards science, why? Why split the disciplines so much? But I don't know. In the end of the day, that's why I'm a writer, and I'm not devising a new curriculum.
No, but I agree with you that at school level is really important when people are much younger. But also the society tends to oppose artists to scientists, and I think society doesn't realize to what extent being a researcher is actually a creative job.
Yes.
And therefore.
And if you think about the great polymaths like Goethe, for example, he was a scientist and a poet, or Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, all these people did everything. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who's hailed as the great romantic poet in England, he went to lectures, chemical lectures, and he said, "I'm doing this to stock up on my metaphors." So there is this sense that, and I think this split is a very recent split, really. And if you talk to I'm not a scientist, but when I talk to scientists, mostly I hear that you need to use imagination to do science, and curiosity and imagination. These are things you need in the arts and in the sciences. That, I think both are trying to make sense of the world around them. They might have different methods, but the goal is the same in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the word metaphor that you used, because there are a number here at EPFL, people think that we should have poetry, actually, because creative science is often about lateral thinking, and poetry and science would work very well together.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think in science communication, it's also incredibly important that that people can understand what you're actually saying, because otherwise, if they can't, and when you look at climate change, if you can't follow the science, if you can't make people feel the science, what's behind this, they're not going to do anything.
So here's an interesting question, the other one too, but where do you think Humboldt would want to explore today?
Oh my God, probably probably the deep sea. He liked everything that was unexplored. So the thing that's most unexplored, I think, is the deep sea. Maybe space. I don't know. But deep sea, I think he'd be very interested in. Everything, because it connects everything.
Who do you think is carrying Humboldt's legacy today?
No one, I think, in a sense. I think all of us, not single person, all of us. I think his ideas are we've taken them so much for granted that we've forgotten. I mean, most people don't even know about Humboldt. So this idea that everything is a living organism, that comes, straight from him. And I think we all carry that in us. So I think, no, not a single person, all of us, hopefully all of us.
Actually, all the work that's being done on trees and what's going on under the ground, that would probably have been a place that he would have found absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I just read Merlin Sheldrake's book Entangled Life, which is an absolute game changer if you want to really get a completely new view of the world. And there's a scientist who says you need to think outside your categories in order to understand fungi. You cannot work in our old categories anymore. You have to, and he has these amazing questions about what is an organism, what is an individual, where does it stop, where does it begin? So you're right. I think actually you're right. That would be probably something Humboldt be very, very interested in.
And now when you walk next to a field where the plowing has been too deep, you feel like they're criminals. They've killed everything under the earth below. Exactly. So is there a part of Humboldt's research you wish he had elaborated on more?
Almost everything, in a way, because Humboldt is, so this is someone he's not very focused on one thing. He is interested in so many things that he jumps from one thing to another. This is one of the reasons why he never becomes an activist about the destruction of the environment. It is within his other work, but it's not focused. This is one of the reasons why I did 8 chapters about other people who took one bit of his research and then actually followed it up, which is not what he does. So if I could choose, I would have liked him to do more work on the environmental issues, because he had such an incredible mind. And I think he was very persuasive in his writing. So if he'd done more on that, maybe we would be in a slightly different place today.
So actually, this is the final question, which is a bit related to that. What is the one key message you hope readers will take away from your book?
I think for me, just on a personal level, for me, it's his impact on how we approach climate change, and his interdisciplinary approach. That's for me the important thing. That this is a scientist who carried 42 scientific instruments up and down the Andes, but at the same time, he never had a problem to say, I love nature. I adore nature. This is, this makes my heart sing. And he describes rainbows jumping over the Orinoco. And in 2 pages on, it's a very long list of measurements, astronomic measurements in his diary. So this is someone who can hold these two worlds in one head or heart. And I think it'd be great if we could all do this and not say, oh, this is kind of, fluffy feeling, something rather about nature as like a tree hugger, and this is a proper scientist. No, I think we're all driven, hopefully, by this love for nature.
So thank you very much, Andrea. It was wonderful to have you here. I hope all the people that have listened today that haven't read your book will read it. And thanks for going through all these notes so that all of us can have a digested view of what he's done and contributed. And I really look forward to reading your other books and the one that you are writing now. So thank you very much and have a lovely Women's Day.
Thank you so much, Du.
Bye-bye.
Bye.